and welcome to the Debka Files. I'm Gabrielle Weiniger with exclusive news and analysis from the Middle East and around the world. On the programme today, a Debka File exclusive. Kurdish Peshmerga forces defy the Iraqi Prime Minister's deadline to surrender positions in Kirkuk. Tensions reach boiling point as Iraqi forces begin to advance. US President Donald Trump threatens to tear up the landmark nuclear deal struck between Iran and world powers, leaving it up to Congress to decide what to do next. And Yemen's Houthi rebel group established a new cable TV station in southern Beirut in the latest tug of war over the country's media narrative. In our top story this week, Iraqi forces have launched a major operation to seize the Kurdish-held province of Kirkuk and its surrounding oil fields. This after a deadline for Peshmerga to surrender positions it captured from ISIS 3 years ago expired Monday morning. The Iraqi operation began with an attack on the K1 military airbase before moving into the headquarters of the North Oil Company, northwest of Kirkuk, a nearby processing plant and the industrial southern district. This according to the Iraqi army. The three-pronged operation led by Iraq security forces, the 9th Armoured Division, Federal Police and counter-terrorism units, as well as the Shiite Popular Mobilization Units, the PMU. Debka File sources reporting that the pro-Iranian Shiite militia is spearheading the operation under the direct command of Revolutionary Guards General Qasem Soleimani, who is currently in the Kurdish region to discuss the escalating crisis. Meanwhile, Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has ordered tanks, heavy artillery, mortars and machine guns into the battlefield. The Iraqi Air Force so far not involved, an effort to prevent escalation into a broader civil conflict and to avoid confrontation with the United States, who oppose the assault. US fighter jets have already been sighted monitoring the battlefield Monday after urgent efforts to keep tensions between its allies from boiling over failed. Now, on the other side, 15,000 Kurdish fighters vowed to defend Kirkuk to the last man. Armed residents say they wanted to defend the city, which is part of a region that declared itself independent in a referendum at the end of last month.
بەڵام ئێمە لەگەڵ هیچ اتفاقیەکانین ئەوەی اتفاقی کرۆ بۆ خۆیان کردوانە لەبەر بەرژەوەندی خۆیان کردوانە ئێمە اتفاق لەگەڵ اتفاقیانیمە ئەوەی ماوەتەوە خەڵکی فەقیر و هەژار و چەکی هەڵگرتووە بەرامبەر حەشدی شعبیە وەستێ حەشدی ئێرانیان ناوردە حەشدی شعبیانە لەکوێوە هێنانە ئێمەوانە ئێمە لەگەڵ داعشان نەگونجاین لەگەڵ ئەوانیشان ناگونجین ئەمە پاسدار ئێرانیە ئەمە عێراقی نییە ئەمانە پاسدارن پاسدار تیرۆریستە ئەمە تیرۆریستە پاسدار ئێرانیە ئێمە لەو شارن نەیەک نەفرە دەرچین شەو بۆ توێڕن بابێن لە چێن یەکەین شەو پاسدار ئێرانیاتە ئەمە حەشدی ئێرانیە قاسم سولەیمانیە ئەمە عێراقی نییە هیچی عێراقی نییە عەرەب نییە فارسە ئەمەی فارسە ئەمە کورد نین ئەمانە عەرەب نین ئەمانە فارسن فارس سونەیان تەواو کرد عەرەب سونەیان تەواو کرد ئێوانە کوردش تەواو کرد ئێمە دیفاعەکەین هەتا بن دیفاع.
Now, joining the local Peshmerga fighters, Kurdish militiamen from outside Iraq. Overnight, thousands of Turkish PKK Kurdish separatists came down from the northern Iraqi Kandil mountains, and the first Syrian YPG militia units have been spotted, lining up on the Syrian-Iraqi border. Now, to break this all down, let's bring in this week's first guest, Dr. Nir Bohms, Research Fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies at the Tel Aviv University. Dr. Bohms, an Iraqi Kurdish commander, said the fighting with Kurdish forces caused lots of casualties. What's happening there on the ground at the moment, and why has Iraq launched this operation at this time?
Well, Gabrielle, these are difficult pictures that are coming from Iraq and from Kurdistan. Since the referendum at the end of last month, the Iraqi government, as well as others in the region, have said that they will not let this happen. They're not going to let the sovereignty of Iraq be compromised by an attempt to proclaim a Kurdish state. You know, we've seen other situations like that, the recent one actually been in Europe in the middle of Spain, so you can understand why a government is not keen on the idea of a separatist movement or so as far as they're concerned. Of course, the Kurds have been preparing for this moment for many, many years, and they were preparing it also militarily. Part of what they had in mind is a realization that there's going to be an attempt of military confrontation, but they were ready for it.
Does that mean then that all diplomatic efforts are now over?
Diplomatic efforts are never over, but the province of Kirkuk is important, for a number of reasons. First of all, this is the border province between Kurdistan and Iraq. Second, it's a high, rich oil province. And third, it is a more heterogeneous province. It has a Kurdish majority, but it also has Turkmens and other minorities. And therefore, there is a bit of a claim that this is not the people there in that province think not exactly alike, just like the KRG. It's also a very important stronghold of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the rivaling party to the KRG led by Jalal Talabani.
What about the makeup of the troops then in the Iraqi army? We just heard the Kurdish residents, that is, of Kirkuk, blaming Iran for the confrontation, didn't we?
Well, this is also what I've been hearing from colleagues and friends in the area. Iran and Qasem Soleimani, who were just reported just to actually be in the region, seems to have been orchestrating this campaign. Of course, the Iranians, who are working now hand in hand with the Iraqis and Hashd al-Shabi, the militia, the Shia militia, in the command and in the front. This idea of militias, something we have seen more and more in these wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen and elsewhere. It's an attempt to create a paramilitary force that is somewhat attached but not exactly into the command of the government, and therefore this enables the Iranians to bring Shia forces that are going to be working directly at their command. And it also seems, at least according to some sources in the KRG, that an agreement was signed between the PUK, between the rivaling opposition Kurdish party, and the Iraqi government, in that sense also by default with the Iranians, to abandon these positions. And in that particular move that has been unanticipated, is perceived by many in Kurdistan as a real betrayal and a very significant blow-off to the independence effort.
Dr. Nir Bohms of the Tel Aviv University, thank you very much for your input as we move along. US President Donald Trump has decided not to certify Iran's compliance with the nuclear deal reached with world powers in 2015. Speaking at the White House, Trump also threatened to terminate the deal at any time, accusing Iran of not living up to the spirit of the agreement. Take a listen.
Based on the factual record I have put forward, I am announcing today that we cannot and will not make this certification. We will not continue down a path whose predictable conclusion is more violence, more terror, and the very real threat of Iran's nuclear breakout. In the event we are not able to reach a solution working with Congress and our allies, then the agreement will be terminated.
So what measures has Trump approved? The administration will take renewed action to counter Iran's operations across the region and abroad. The American president also called for new sanctions to be strictly imposed on Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, a military unit loyal to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, for its role in sponsoring global terror. The State Department, though, stopped short of listing the IRGC on its terror blacklist. The US will also prevent Tehran from conducting ballistic missile tests and intends to tighten international inspections of Iran's compliance to the nuclear deal. Trump also ordered an intelligence review of Iran's dealings with North Korea, calling on Congress and world powers to introduce new sanctions against the Islamic Republic. But EU Chief Federica Mogherini says the EU will continue to fully implement the deal.
More than 2 years ago, exactly in July 2015, the entire international community welcomed the result of 12 years of intense negotiations on the Iranian nuclear program. 104 pages full of technical details. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it.
Debka File sources now confirming this. They say Trump can't count on the support of the EU nor Congress for his new strategy against Iran. leaving the US president with no other option but to issue executive directives to reimpose sanctions. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani responded to Trump's decision to decertify the deal, saying Iran will not renegotiate the agreement, vowing to expand the country's defense capabilities twofold.
ملت ایران ملتی نیست که با حرفهای ناروا و سخنان تنفر انگیز بخواهند در برابر یک دیکتاتور سر فرود بیاورند. ملت ایران در برابر هیچ قدرتی سر تسلیم فرود نیاورده و نخواهد آورد.
Military sources in Iran telling Debka Files the regime will not let Trump's decision pass unnoticed, laying out the following three-point strategy. Firstly, formulating a string of diplomatic measures that may include enlisting Russia, China and the EU to internationally condemn the United States. Military steps will be taken against American targets in the Persian Gulf and Middle East. And lastly, Iran will supply more strategic weaponry, such as long-range missiles, to pro-Iranian proxies. Now, the US Congress has 60 days to decide whether or not to reimpose economic sanctions on Tehran that were lifted under the pact, meaning a decision must be made by December 5th. Let's turn now to this week's guest, Director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman. Dr. Sherman, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
The international community has largely criticised Trump's decision, the EU vowing to uphold the agreement, experts, analysts coming out against it as dangerous and destabilising. What's behind the president's thinking here, and was it a unilateral decision?
Well, yes, it was a unilateral decision, but I think what's behind the president's thinking is quite clear. The agreement is a joke, and he really couldn't certify it in good faith, because no one really knows.
But he certified it twice before. This was the third time he was supposed to sign off, and he didn't. So what's changed?
That doesn't mean we have to repeat bad decisions, because no one really knows if Iran is in compliance, because there are sites which are outside inspections in the military sites. There are all sorts of secret side agreements which no one really knows what's in it. And in principle, it's like an agreement you have with your neighbor that he will refrain from using firearms against you, but you don't object to him storing clubs, spears, knives, and bows and arrows. Not only that, you finance the acquisition of those clubs, knives, and bows and arrows. So the agreement is really laughable. In the end, it will inevitably lead to some kind of conflict between at least the United States and perhaps the rest of the West, because that's the way it's going. Iran will continue to push the envelope as far as it can. And until it reaches a stage where even the West finds it unacceptable. And by that time, instead of having a weak, impoverished Iran, as we had in 2015, you will have a strong and empowered Iran. It's also probably undermined the only real solution for the Iranian problem, and that's regime change. Because this agreement, as I said before, has empowered Iran militarily, enriched it economically, and entrenched this regime politically. So I don't think that in any way this regime has any post-Obama goods outcomes.
Dr. Martin Sherman, Director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, will be monitoring developments there on the Iranian nuclear deal ahead of that Congress vote. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Palestinian rival political parties, Hamas and Fatah, have reached a unity deal in the Egyptian capital as part of an effort to end a decade-long split. Egypt has been mediating the most recent talks in Cairo after years of failed attempts. The relationship between Hamas and Fatah soured in 2006 after Hamas won the election and seized Gaza after a spate of violence. At a press conference, the head of the Palestinian Authority delegation, Azam al-Ahmed, said the PA would assume full control of the crossing between Egypt and Gaza by November 1st, and for the full handover of administrative control of Gaza to the unity government by December. Those statements on the reconciliation deal before Debka Files breaks it down its regional repercussions.
أولاً هذه المرة بتعليمات الرئيس أبو مازن والتأكيد يجب أن لا تعودوا إلا وأنتم متفقون. يجب طي صفحة الانقسام إلى الأبد لنوحد جهود الشعب الفلسطيني بكل قواه وفي مقدمتهم فتح وحماس حتى نستطيع مجابهة الاحتلال من أجل تحقيق الحلم الفلسطيني بإنهاء هذا الاحتلال البغيض وتجسيد إقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة ذات السيادة والقدس عاصمتها.
وإحنا في حركة حماس عازمين وجادين وصادقين في هذه المرة وفي كل مرة في إنهاء الانقسام. وإحنا بادرنا بقرار أحادي مع الإخوة في مصر حين شعرنا أن موضوع اللجنة الإدارية يشكل مشكلة، والإخوة في فتح والرئيس أبو مازن يصر على حل هذه اللجنة. قلنا للإخوة المصريين تفضلوا، هذه عهدة عندكم وحلوا اللجنة الإدارية، ففتحنا الباب من أجل الوصول إلى هذه المصالحة.
Saleh Aruri, former head of the West Bank's terror operations, headed Hamas's negotiations in Cairo. Debka File sources saying he postponed his return to the predominantly Shiite Dehia al-Janubiyya, the southern suburbs of Beirut, to stay in Cairo and negotiate the terms of the deal. The PA is committed to deploying 3,000 security personnel to Gaza's borders and crossings, and Hamas remains resolved to keep its military arm, the Ezz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, fully intact, with all 25,000 fighters. US officials are expressing hope the deal will ease Gaza's humanitarian crisis. The enclave sometimes only receiving 3 hours of electricity a day this past summer, depriving 2 million people of vital medical care, clean water and sanitation. Israel, meanwhile, saying Hamas must first recognize the State of Israel and disband its military wing before acknowledging the pact. Dr. Eli Carmon, senior research scholar at the IDC Herzliya, joins us now in studio to discuss. Dr. Carmon, many failed attempts for unity collapsed over the last few years. The most recent signed in a refugee camp in Gaza 3 years ago. After 2 years of trying to implement it, it went the way of all the others. Will this deal succeed when all the others have failed?
Hello. For the moment, this is a victory for Abu Mazen because he received partial control of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza and especially the control of the border with Egypt and Israel. The great question is what happens with the weapons of Hamas and also the terrorist and violent activity of Hamas in the West Bank. And this will be the real exam, if you want, for this agreement, if it will succeed or not. Interestingly, Abu Mazen was adamant in declaring that he is not accepting a situation like in Lebanon to have a Hezbollah in the Gaza Strip, which means he wants to disarm the Hamas. Hamas is not interested in doing it. So, in my opinion, this will be the main problem between the two sides. And there is another problem. What Hamas wants through this kind of moderation, if you want, is to try to participate in new elections in the West Bank and Gaza, hopefully to win the elections also in the West Bank and thus take control of the Palestinian Authority. And the other thing is they are very much interested in running for the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization structure, which could give them control over all the movement of the Palestinian resistance movement or Palestinian national movement. For the moment, there is a euphoria, if you want, but if we look to the population in Gaza and in the West Bank, the people there are quite skeptic. They are not really sure that this agreement will succeed.
We did see some celebrations there in the West Bank and Gaza. We're hearing word of maybe cautious optimism, let's call it, and of course the celebrations there in the Palestinian territories. Do you think there's strong support for this deal among the Palestinian public?
There was always a very strong support for an agreement, not an agreement, a unity between the two main factions. But because half of the population is supporting Hamas and the other half is supporting Fatah, it's very difficult to see how they will compromise on the main issues, which is how to relate to Israel, how to relate to the popular resistance, or if you want, to armed struggle, and if they are ready to compromise on central issues, which the Palestinian Authority has already compromised by recognizing Israel on the part for Hamas, for example. And we know that the quartet, which decided on the conditions which could put Hamas in a legitimacy vis-à-vis the international community, has very strict conditions.
We haven't heard anything about that yet so far. No Israeli or American sanctions have been imposed on Palestinians over the unity agreement. So how are they formulating their response to this deal, both in the US and in Israel?
I think the Americans are interested in this agreement because one of the main points in order to advance in the negotiations is that you have to have a united Palestinian partner. That was one of the main arguments against the possibility to advance in the negotiations between the PA and Israel. And the second, because President Trump wants some kind of victory, and if this agreement is successful, it could be seen like he's successful, and also of the President Sisi of Egypt. From the Israeli point of view, I think the Israeli political leadership and also the defense establishment are very skeptical, but they are ready to see how things develop, and especially if the violence in the West Bank will not continue under the incitement of Hamas like in the past, and also if those which will be probably liberated from the Palestinian Authority jails, the Hamas terrorists, they will not return to use terrorism against Israel.
All right, well, Egypt has set November 21st as the date for the next step of the process, a meeting in Cairo of all the Palestinian factions. For now, Dr. Eli Carmon, thank you for this.
Thank you.
For now, though, this week's news in brief. Debka File's military sources reveal all Syrian forces trained by the US to combat ISIS in southeastern Syria have withdrawn to Jordan. This includes the Al-Shaqiyya and Marta Ahmed al-Abdo Brigade militias, which were part of the Free Syrian Army. They've evacuated the Badia region of the Syrian desert up to the 55-kilometer line from the US Al-Tanf base. That's inside the Syrian-Iraqi-Jordanian border triangle, leaving Hezbollah and the Syrian army in control there. Russia is preparing to shut down the US Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. This to disqualify its report of 2 major Syrian chemical assaults on civilians. The OPCW will inform the UN Security Council this month that the Assad regime used poison gas to kill 92 people at Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib earlier this year, and that its warplanes used sarin gas in Latamna in northern Hama, where 100 people were injured. The watchdog's mandate expires next month. Yemen's Houthi rebel group have established a new cable TV station in the Al-Dahiya al-Junubiyya, considered a Hezbollah stronghold in southern Beirut. The UN envoy for Yemen, Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, has been seen visiting the new TV offices several times. The UN saying this is the only way the world body can communicate with the Iran-backed Yemen insurgents. And Israeli government hackers tipped off the American National Security Agency over suspicious activity on the computers of a Moscow-based cybersecurity firm during 2015. According to a New York Times report, Israeli spies found hacking material on the network of Kaspersky Lab, the global antivirus firm under the spotlight in the US, suspicious of its products for facilitating Russian espionage by producing silent signatures to find malware and searching computers for potentially classified documents. That wraps up this week's edition of the Debka Files. Thanks to this week's guest, Dr. Nir Bohms, Dr. Martin Sherman and Dr. Eli Carmon. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime on the Debka website. That's debka.com, or sign on to the weekly newsletter for more in-depth breaking news stories from around the region and around the world. From myself and the whole team here in Tel Aviv, goodbye for now.